If you're a true Game of Thrones fan, then I suspect that you, like me, felt a deep sense of betrayal as you watched the final episodes of Season 8. After all, this was supposed to be the epic conclusion to the greatest television series ever made. These characters had been with us for nearly a decade. Jon Snow's journey from bastard to hero, Daenerys breaking chains and inspiring millions, Tyrion's brilliant mind navigating the Game of Thrones, Arya's transformation into a deadly assassin. Every season felt like a cultural event, and every episode brought us deeper into a world that often felt more real than reality itself. So when I watched Daenerys burn King's Landing for no logical reason, when I saw Jon Snow reduced to saying "I don't want it" repeatedly, when Bran became king because he had the best story, I couldn't help but feel hollow. Not because the characters deserved happy endings, but because they deserved endings that made sense, endings that honored their journeys, endings that felt earned. But what if there was another season? A season that gave us real closure on these character arcs we'd followed for years. A story that didn't rush through major plot points in 6 episodes, but instead took the time to properly conclude the Song of Ice and Fire. That's the story I want to explore. And thanks to the help of AI, we can now write that story. I'm completely rewriting Game of Thrones Season 8 using artificial intelligence. This isn't just fixing a few scenes ice, this is creating an entirely new 10-episode season that picks up from the end of Season 7 and gives us the conclusion this story deserved. But before we begin, I need to set some serious ground rules. Here are the parameters I've given the AI. First, keep characters consistent. That means no sudden personality changes for shock value. Daenerys doesn't become a psychopath overnight. Jon doesn't forget how to lead, and Tyrion doesn't lose his intelligence. Second, logic over subversion. Events must make sense within the established world. No more kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet moments or characters teleporting across continents. Third, earn the victories. Heroes win through smart decisions, teamwork, and meaningful sacrifice. Every triumph comes with a cost that makes sense. Fourth, deaths have meaning. Characters don't die just for surprise or shock value. When someone dies, it serves their story arc or protects others. Fifth, political realism. Solutions must work within medieval fantasy politics. Real succession laws and power structures guide decisions. And finally, hope over cynicism. While Game of Thrones was brutal, it was ultimately about hope triumphing over despair. We're embracing that theme instead of nihilistic subversion. The next thing I want to clearly establish is where the story picks up. We will be continuing the story from the end of Season 7 when armies were gathering at Winterfell, when Jon and Daenerys had just united ice and fire, when the Night King was marching south with the army of the dead. Everything that happened in the original Season 8, we're completely scrapping it. This is our clean slate. The AI will treat this as the epic conclusion it was meant to be. 10 full episodes to properly resolve every character arc, every political thread, every prophecy that's been building for years. So without further delay, let's begin the Season 8 that Game of Thrones deserved. Chapter 1, Winter's Army. The great courtyard of Winterfell bustled with activity that would have been unimaginable just moons ago. Northern bannermen worked alongside Dothraki warriors, their curved arcs gleaming as they sharpened weapons beside Northmen with their ancestral swords. The smell of dragonfire lingered in the air from Daenerys' daily training flights, mixing with the familiar sense of leather, steel, and wood smoke. Jon Snow stood atop the battlements, watching the organized chaos below. His breath misted in the cold morning air as he observed the largest army ever assembled in the north. Unsullied soldiers moved in perfect formation, their spears catching the weak winter sunlight. Nearby, free folk scattered throughout the courtyard, their wildling ways still causing nervous glances from some northern lords, though fewer each day. Quite a sight, isn't it? Jon turned to find Tyrion Lannister approaching, wrapped in a thick fur cloak that made him look even smaller than usual. The hand of the Queen climbed the steps with careful precision, his breath coming in short puffs. "I never thought I'd see Dothraki and Northmen sharing a fire," Jon replied, gesturing toward a group below where warriors from both cultures sat around a brazier, attempting to communicate through gestures and broken common tongue. "Your queen has a gift for bringing unlikely allies together," Tyrion observed, though something in his tone suggested deeper thoughts. "The question is whether it will be enough." Before Jon could respond, the distinctive sound of beating wings filled the air. Drogon descended from the gray sky, Daenerys astride his back, her silver hair whipping in the wind created by the dragon's massive wings. The great beast landed in the courtyard with earth-shaking force, and even the seasoned warriors stepped back respectfully. Daenerys slid down from Drogon's back with practiced ease, her riding leathers practical but regal. She stroked the dragon's snout affectionately before making her way toward the keep, her Queensguard flanking her. Jon felt that familiar warmth in his chest watching her, the Dragon Queen who had sailed across the narrow sea to fight a war that wasn't hers. "She's been flying the perimeter every morning," Jon said to Tyrion, "looking for any sign of them. And nothing yet. But Bran says they're coming. The dead don't rest, and winter is here." Tyrion pulled his cloak tighter. "How many do we have now?" "Nearly 40,000. If you count everyone. Northmen, free folk, unsullied, Dothraki, the Knights of the Vale should arrive within the fortnight." Jon's expression darkened. "It won't be enough if half the stories about the Night King are true." "Then we'd better make sure the other half aren't," Tyrion said, with forced levity. A commotion in the courtyard below caught their attention. Arya Stark moved through a group of Dothraki warriors, demonstrating techniques with her Valyrian steel dagger. The horsemen watched with fascination as the small northern girl disarmed one of their number with movements too quick to follow. When she finished, they erupted in appreciative shouts and harsh laughter. "Your sister has been busy," Tyrion noted, "training everyone who'll listen about fighting the dead." "She knows what we're facing," Jon said grimly. "We all do now." The sound of approaching footsteps made them turn. Sansa Stark climbed toward them, her face bearing the controlled expression that had become her armor in recent years. She wore practical northern garb, but the way she carried herself spoke of hard-earned authority. "Jon, Lord Tyrion," she nodded to each in turn. "The supply wagons from White Harbor have arrived. We have enough grain for another month. But if this siege lasts longer—" "It won't," Jon said, with more confidence than he felt. "One way or another, this ends soon." Sansa's blue eyes studied her half-brother's face. "San sent a raven from the citadel. He's found something in the old texts about dragonglass. He should arrive by tomorrow with whatever knowledge he's gathered." "Good," Tyrion said. "We'll need every advantage we can get." A horn sounded from the gates, long and clear. All three turned toward the sound, as riders approached under familiar banners, the red weirwood of House Blackwood, the purple unicorn of House Brune, smaller houses from across the north, answering the call. "More come every day," Sansa observed. "Word is spreading. They know what's at stake." "As do our enemies," Jon replied. He looked out beyond the walls, toward the vast expanse of white that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there, in the endless winter, an army marched that had no need for food, rest, or warmth. An army that grew stronger with every battle, adding the fallen to its ranks. "The last alliance," Tyrion murmured, following Jon's gaze. "Men and women who've spent generations fighting each other, now standing together against the dark." "It has to be enough," Sansa said quietly. It has to be. As if summoned by their words, Daenerys appeared at the top of the stairs. Having made her way through the keep, her violet eyes found Jon immediately, and something passed between them, an understanding forged in fire and ice, in shared purpose and growing affection. "Your Grace," Sansa said with careful courtesy. The relationship between the Stark sisters and the Dragon Queen remained delicate, built on mutual respect but not yet trust. "Lady Sansa, Lord Tyrion." Daenerys moved to stand beside Jon, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The dragons grow restless. They sense something coming. "How long?" Jon asked. "Days, perhaps a week at most." Her voice carried the weight of prophecy. "Drogon keeps turning north when we fly, as if he can smell death on the wind." Tyrion shifted uncomfortably. "And our preparations?" "Nearly complete," Sansa answered. "The crypts are ready to house non-combatants. We have enough weapons for every able-bodied fighter, though most are steel rather than dragonglass." "The dead fear fire more than steel," Daenerys said. "My dragons will provide that." 3 dragons against an army of the dead, Jon mused. "The odds have never stopped us before," Daenerys finished, her hand finding his. "We faced impossible odds and survived. We'll do it again." A comfortable silence settled over the group as they watched the sun sink lower in the winter sky. The temperature was dropping, and already torches were being lit throughout the courtyard. The sight of so many flames flickering in the growing darkness was somehow comforting, light against the encroaching night. "There's something else," Jon said finally. "Bran wants to see us all tonight. He says there are things we need to know about the Night King before the battle comes." "What sort of things?" Tyrion asked. "The kind that might save us," Jon replied, "or damn us all." Chapter 2. Fire and Ice United. The dragon pit behind Winterfell had been hastily constructed from stone and timber, large enough to house 3 dragons but modest compared to the great dragon pit of King's Landing. Rhaegal and Viserion rested on opposite sides of the enclosure, their golden and cream scales gleaming in the afternoon light. Between them the air shimmered with residual heat from their breath. Jon approached the entrance with measured steps, his hand resting on Longclaw's pommel, more from habit than necessity. Behind him, Daenerys walked with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted her bond with these magnificent beasts. The dragons stirred as they sensed their mother's presence, great heads lifting and eyes focusing with intelligent awareness. "They still don't fully trust me," Jon said, watching as Rhaegal's golden eyes tracked his movement. "They will," Daenerys replied. "Trust is earned even among dragons, but they already sense something in you, something familiar." She moved past him into the pit, and immediately all 3 dragons shifted their attention to her. Drogon rumbled deep in his chest, a sound of recognition and affection. Daenerys spoke to them in High Valyrian, her voice carrying the musical cadence of her ancestors. The dragons responded with gentle huffs of warm air, steam rising from their nostrils. "What are you telling them?" Jon asked. "That winter has come, and we must be ready." She gestured for him to come closer. "Give me your hand." Jon stepped forward, and Daenerys took his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining. The contact sent warmth up his arm, and he noticed the dragons watching this exchange with what seemed like approval. Rhaegal, in particular, lowered his great head closer to where they stood. "He was named for your father," Daenerys said softly. "Rhaegar Targaryen. Perhaps that means something." "Perhaps it does." Jon reached out slowly with his free hand, letting Rhaegal catch his scent. The dragon's breath was hot against his palm, but not uncomfortably so. After a moment, Rhaegal allowed Jon to touch the warm scales of his snout. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. Jon felt the dragon's power, his fierce intelligence, and something else that seemed almost like recognition. Images flashed through his mind. Memories that weren't his own, of soaring above clouds and breathing fire that could melt stone. "The bond," Daenerys whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I've never seen anything like it. Usually, it takes months, years even." Jon stepped back, his head spinning from the intensity of the experience. "What does this mean?" "It means you're truly one of us. The dragon's blood runs strong in you, Jon Snow." She smiled, and for a moment the weight of impending war seemed to lift from her shoulders. "Would you like to fly with me?" The offer caught him off guard. "I don't know the first thing about riding a dragon." "Neither did I, the first time. The dragons will teach you, if you let them." Within the hour, Jon found himself astride Rhaegal's back, gripping the ridged scales as the dragon prepared for flight. Daenerys sat confidently on Drogon nearby, offering encouragement and instruction. Viserion had been left in the pit, as 2 dragons would be challenging enough for Jon's first lesson. "Don't fight him," Daenerys called out. "Feel what he feels. Trust him to carry you." Rhaegal spread his massive wings and Jon's stomach lurched as they left the ground. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. More intense than riding the swiftest horse, more liberating than standing atop the wall. The ground fell away beneath them, and Winterfell became a collection of toy buildings surrounded by an army of ants. Drogon rose alongside them, his black scales absorbing the sunlight as Daenerys guided him through the air with subtle shifts of her body. Jon tried to copy her movements, and to his amazement, Rhaegal responded to his uncertain commands. They banked left following the course of the river, and Jon felt a rush of exhilaration that made him forget momentarily about the army of the dead. "How does it feel?" Daenerys called out, her voice carrying over the wind. "Like freedom," Jon called back, and meant it. They flew over the assembled armies, and Jon could see the upturned faces of soldiers pointing at the sky. Dothraki warriors whooped and cheered, while northern men watched with expressions of awe and not a little fear. From this height, the defensive preparations were clearly visible, the trenches being dug, the spikes being placed, the careful positioning of siege weapons. But Jon's attention was drawn north, beyond the organized chaos of their defenses, to the empty lands that stretched toward the wall. Somewhere out there, an enemy approached that had no need for siege weapons or cavalry charges, an enemy that would keep coming no matter how many fell, adding each casualty to their own ranks. "We need to see how far they've come," Jon said when they landed back in the dragon pit, a scouting flight north. Daenerys nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing, but if we encounter them in the air, then we retreat. Information is more valuable than a premature battle." They spent the rest of the afternoon practicing aerial maneuvers, with Daenerys teaching Jon the basic commands in High Valyrian. The dragons seemed to understand that this was preparation for something serious, their playful nature giving way to focused attention. By evening, Jon felt confident enough to stay mounted during sharp turns and rapid climbs, though he knew he was still far from being a true dragon rider. As the sun began to set, they returned to the keep to find Tyrion waiting in the courtyard with a troubled expression. Behind him stood Jorah Mormont, recently arrived from his mission to rally support from the eastern houses. "Your Grace, Jon," Tyrion said with unusual formality, "we've received disturbing news." "What is it?" Daenerys asked, sliding down from Drogon's back. "Ravens from Eastwatch," Jorah answered. "The wall has fallen completely. What remains of the Night's Watch has retreated south, but they report that the breach is now miles wide. The dead pour through like a black tide." Jon felt his blood turn cold. "How many?" "More than we feared. The Night King has been gathering the dead from across the north. Every village, every holdfast that fell during the wars. Conservative estimates put their numbers at over 100,000. 100,000, Daenerys repeated quietly. "Against our 40,000. Numbers aren't everything," Tyrion said. though his voice lacked conviction. "We have dragons, we have defensive positions, we have discipline. We have men who can die," Jon corrected grimly. "Every soldier we lose becomes one of theirs. Every victory for us is temporary. Every defeat for us is permanent." Jorah stepped forward. "There's something else. The survivors from Eastwatch report seeing something new among the dead. Giants, but not just any giants. Undead giants, bigger than any living giant they've ever seen." "One," Jon whispered, remembering the giant who had died, saving him at the Battle of the Bastards. "They have one, and others. The Night King has been collecting his army for a very long time." Daenerys moved closer to Jon, her hand finding his arm. "We knew this would be difficult. We've prepared for this." "Have we?" Jon asked. "Have we really prepared for an enemy that turns our own dead against us? An enemy that grows stronger with every battle?" "We've prepared as much as we can," Tyrion said. "Now we must have faith in our preparations." "Faith," Jon repeated. "Against the long night, faith might be all we have." As if summoned by their grim conversation, more ravens began arriving, black shapes against the darkening sky. Each one carried news from the north, and each report painted a bleaker picture. The dead had overrun Last Hearth, adding the Umbers to their ranks. They had swept through the Carthold, claiming the Karstarks who had remained loyal to their ancestral seat. Village after village fell silent, their populations swelling the Night King's army. "At this rate, they'll be here within days," Jorah said, after reading the latest messages. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready," Daenerys said with quiet determination. "Jon, tomorrow we fly north. We need to see this army for ourselves." Agreed. Jon looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the clear sky. "But tonight we rest. Tomorrow we learn exactly what we're facing." As they walked back toward the keep, Jon couldn't shake the feeling that their time was running out faster than they had anticipated. The dead didn't need to rest, didn't need to eat, didn't need to plan elaborate strategies. They simply came, relentless and unstoppable, like winter itself. But they had dragons, he reminded himself. They had fire, and fire had always been the enemy of ice and death. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they would prepare for the greatest battle of their lives. Chapter 3: The Dragon's Truth. The crypts of Winterfell had stood for 8,000 years, housing the bones of Stark kings and lords in the darkness beneath the castle. Torchlight flickered off stone faces carved with loving detail, each statue bearing the likeness of the man whose remains lay beneath. Jon walked slowly among these monuments to his family's history, his footsteps echoing in the vast underground chamber. Samwell Tarly waited near the tomb of Lyanna Stark, a leather satchel at his feet filled with ancient texts and scrolls. His face was pale in the torchlight, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a particular manuscript to his chest. Behind him stood Bran, seated in his wheeled chair, his strange, knowing eyes fixed on something only he could see. "You're certain?" Jon asked. Though he already knew the answer, the truth had been building in his mind for moons now, pieces falling into place like stones in an avalanche. "As certain as I can be," Sam replied. "I've checked the records 3 times. The marriage was performed by the High Septon himself, in secret at the Tower of Joy. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen wed Lyanna Stark in the sight of gods and men, annulling his previous marriage to Elia Martell. Which makes you," Bran said in his eerily calm voice, "Aegon Targaryen, 6th of his name, rightful king of the 7 kingdoms." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Jon felt the weight of them settle on his shoulders, heavier than any crown could ever be. He reached out to touch his aunt's statue, the stone face that looked so much like Arya's. "She died to protect this secret," he said quietly. Robert would have killed me if he'd known. And now, Sam asked, what do we do with this knowledge? Before Jon could answer, footsteps echoed from the stairway. Daenerys descended into the crypts, her silver hair catching the torchlight like spun moonbeams. She moved with purpose, but Jon could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that masked deeper emotions. "Your Grace," Sam said, bowing awkwardly. "I didn't expect—" "Tyrion told me you'd gathered," she said simply. "Important discussions should include all parties who might be affected." Jon studied her face, looking for any sign of what she might be thinking. They had grown close over the past weeks, their alliance deepening into something more personal, more complicated. The thought of losing that connection, of seeing her retreat behind the armor of royal protocol, filled him with dread. "Then you know," he said. "I know what Sam discovered. I know what Bran has seen." She moved closer, her violet eyes never leaving his face. "The question is what it means to us." "It means Jon is the heir," Sam said, his voice stronger now. "By all laws of succession, he has the better claim." "Laws written by dead men," Daenerys replied without heat. "I've spent my entire life believing I was the last Targaryen, the rightful queen. I've conquered cities and liberated slaves under that banner. Now I discover I'm not the heir, but the spare." The bitterness in her voice was carefully controlled, but Jon heard it nonetheless. He stepped toward her, closing the distance between them. "You're not the spare," he said firmly. "You're Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt mother of dragons. You earned your titles through your own deeds, not through birth." "As did you, Jon Snow," she smiled, but it was a complex expression, mixing sadness with something that might have been relief. "Or should I say, Your Grace?" "Don't." The word came out harder than he intended. "I never wanted a crown. I still don't. But you have one nonetheless." Bran's voice cut through their exchange like a blade. "Want has nothing to do with it. The three-eyed raven sees all possible futures, and in most of them you rule." "Most, but not all?" Daenerys asked. "The future is not fixed. Choices matter. But yes, there are paths where you sit, the Iron Throne. There are paths where Jon does. There are paths where neither of you survive the next fortnight." "Comforting," Sam muttered. Jon turned away from them all, his gaze finding the statue of his father, Ned Stark, the man who had raised him, loved him, protected him with a lie that had cost him his honor. How many people had died for this secret? How many more would die because of it? "There's something else," he said, facing them again. "Something more important than crowns or claims." "What?" Daenerys asked. "The Night King isn't just trying to destroy humanity. He's trying to erase it. Every memory, every story, every trace that we ever existed." Jon gestured to the statues around them. "These crypts, these records, Sam's books, everything that makes us who we are. He wants to wipe it all away and start over with a world of silence." "The long night that never ends," Bran agreed. "I've seen it in my visions. A world covered in ice where nothing grows and nothing lives except his creatures. Which is why the throne doesn't matter right now." Jon continued. "We can argue about crowns after we've saved the world." Daenerys was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the flickering torchlight. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "You're right, of course. The dead don't care about bloodlines or succession laws." She paused, then smiled with genuine warmth. "Besides, there's another solution." "What do you mean?" Sam asked. "Aegon the Conqueror had 2 wives," she said, her eyes never leaving Jon's. "Rhaenys and Visenya, 2 queens, 1 king. It's not without precedent." Jon felt his heart skip. "Daenerys, think about it. The North loves you, but they'll never fully accept a Southern ruler. The South knows me, respects my power, but they fear Northern independence. She stepped closer to him, her hand finding his. Together we could unite the 7 kingdoms properly, not through conquest, but through alliance. The faith would never accept it, Sam pointed out. Polygamy was outlawed centuries ago. Laws can be changed, Daenerys replied, especially by those who make them. And if the people won't accept it, Jon asked, then we'll face that challenge when we come to it. Right now, we have a more immediate problem. She turned to Bran. How long do we have? 3 days, Bran said without hesitation. Maybe 4 if the weather turns. Then, we'd better make them count. Jon squeezed Daenerys' hand, drawing strength from her touch. Sam, I need you to prepare copies of these documents. If we don't survive the battle, someone should know the truth. Already done, Sam said, patting his satchel. Multiple copies sent to the Citadel, to King's Landing, to Dawn. The truth will survive, even if we don't. Good. Jon looked around at the assembled group, these people who had become his closest allies and advisors. Then let's go prepare for war. As they climbed back up to the main levels of Winterfell, Jon felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. The truth was out, shared among those who mattered most. The burden of his parentage was no longer his alone to carry, and whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. Daenerys walked beside him, her hand still in his, and he could feel her strength flowing through their connection. They were fire and ice, dragon and wolf, but they were united in purpose. The Night King might have numbers, might have magic, might have death itself on his side, but he didn't have what they had. He didn't have love. There's one more thing, Daenerys said, as they reached the main hall, something I've been thinking about since we learned the truth. What? Your name, Aegon. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. It was my brother's name too. The brother who was supposed to be king before me. I know. He was murdered as a baby, his head dashed against a wall by Gregor Clegane. For years I dreamed of avenging him, of reclaiming what was stolen from our family. She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. But now I wonder if perhaps the gods had a different plan. Perhaps Aegon was always meant to return, just not in the way anyone expected. Jon considered this, the strange symmetry of it all. Perhaps, or perhaps we're just 2 people trying to make sense of a senseless world. Perhaps, but I'd rather face that senseless world with you than without you. You won't have to, Jon promised. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, bright points of light against the encroaching darkness. Somewhere to the north, an army of the dead marched through the snow, bringing winter and death with every step. But here, in this moment, Jon felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Chapter 4. Gathering Storm. The great hall of Winterfell had been transformed into a war room, with maps covering every available surface and messengers arriving at all hours with reports from across the north. The massive oak table at the center bore a detailed rendering of the lands between Winterfell and the Wall, marked with colored pins showing the positions of friendly forces and the last known locations of the dead. Lyanna Mormont stood at the head of the table despite her small stature, her voice carrying the authority of someone twice her age as she addressed the assembled lords and commanders. Bear Island might be small, but House Mormont had produced warriors for 1,000 years, and Lyanna was proving herself worthy of that legacy. Every man, woman, and child on Bear Island who can hold a weapon will fight, she declared, her fierce gaze sweeping across the room. We didn't survive Ironborn raids and wildling attacks just to surrender to a bunch of dead men. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathering. Lord Royce of the Vale nodded respectfully, while Tormund Giantsbane let out a bark of laughter from where he leaned against the wall. The wildling leader had taken an immediate liking to the young Mormont, declaring her to have the heart of a giant in the body of a cub. "The Umbers will stand with House Stark," announced young Ned Umber, his voice cracking slightly with nervousness. The boy couldn't be more than 12, but he wore his father's armor and carried himself with determined dignity. "Last hearth has fallen, but the Umbers remember their oaths." Jon watched the proceedings from beside the great hearth, observing how naturally the northern lords rallied around the defense of their homeland. These were hard people, shaped by harsh winters and harder choices, but they were united in a way the South had never managed. When faced with extinction, old grudges became irrelevant. "What news from the Riverlands?" asked Maigman, Lyanna's aunt and the current regent of Bear Island. The older woman had arrived that morning with 200 seasoned fighters, all of them grim-faced and ready for battle. "Lord Edmure has secured Riverrun and is sending what men he can spare," Tyrion reported from his position near the maps. "Not many, I'm afraid. The Riverlands are still recovering from the wars." "What about the Freys?" someone called out. "Dead," Arya said simply from her spot near the door. "All of them." The room fell silent for a moment as the implications of that statement settled. No one asked for details, and Arya offered none. Some secrets were better left unexplored. "The important thing," Jon said, stepping forward to address the group, "is that we have enough men to make a stand. Quality matters more than quantity in this fight." "Does it?" asked Lord Glover, his weathered face creased with worry. "When every man who falls joins their ranks." "That's why we burn the dead," Tormund interjected. "Fire kills them permanently. Even the Night King can't bring back ash." "Easier said than done in the middle of a battle," Glover replied. "Then we'd better plan accordingly," Daenerys said as she entered the hall, still wearing her flying leathers from the morning's reconnaissance flight. Snow clung to her silver hair, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold wind. "I've seen them, the army of the dead." The room erupted in excited chatter as everyone pressed forward to hear her report. Jon moved to her side, noting the troubled expression she tried to hide behind her queenly composure. "How many?" he asked quietly. "More than we hoped, fewer than we feared." She accepted a cup of mulled wine from a servant and wrapped her hands around it gratefully. "Perhaps 80,000, though it's difficult to count when they move like a black tide across the snow." 80,000, Lord Royce repeated grimly, "against our 40,000. Numbers aren't everything," Lyanna Mormont declared. "We have dragons." "We do," Daenerys agreed. "And they seem to be the only thing the dead truly fear." When Drogon flew over their army, the entire host stopped moving. For a moment they actually retreated. This news brought a spark of hope to the assembled commanders. If the dragons could scatter the enemy forces even temporarily, it might create opportunities for tactical victories. "What about their commander?" Jon asked. "Did you see the Night King?" Daenerys nodded slowly. "He rides at the center of the host on something that was once a horse. Even from a distance I could feel the cold radiating from him, and there was something else." "What?" He looked up at me. Not just glanced, but really looked, as if he recognized me. Or the dragons. As if he's been waiting for us. A chill ran through the room that had nothing to do with the winter air. The idea that the Night King might have anticipated their moves, might have planned for the presence of dragons, was deeply unsettling. "Bran mentioned something similar," Sam said from where he sat, hunched over a pile of ancient texts. "In his visions the Night King seems to know things he shouldn't. Past, present, future. It all seems to blur together for him." "Like Bran himself," Jon observed. "Perhaps that's why he wants Bran so badly," Tyrion suggested. "They share similar abilities. One serves life, the other serves death." "Then we keep Bran safe," Daenerys said firmly. "Whatever the Night King wants with him, We don't let him have it. Agreed. Jon turned back to the assembled lords. What's our defensive situation? Sir Davos stepped forward, his practical mind having been invaluable in organizing their preparations. The walls are as strong as we can make them. We've dug trenches filled with pitch and oil, placed dragon glass spikes throughout the approaches. Every archer has dragon glass arrows. Every sword has been touched with dragon glass, if we had enough. The crypts are prepared for non-combatants, Sansa added, having appeared silently during the discussion. Food, water, medical supplies. If the walls fall, we can retreat there and hold out for some time. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Jon said. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the tall windows, they could see riders approaching the main gate under the banners of House Arryn. The Knights of the Vale had arrived, their heavy cavalry and disciplined infantry adding significantly to Winterfell's defenders. Robin Arryn? Tyrion asked with surprise. The boy has grown into his lordship, Sansa replied with satisfaction. He's brought nearly 3,000 men. As the day wore on, more arrivals continued to swell their ranks. Minor houses from across the north sent what men they could spare. Free folk warriors arrived in small groups, their various clans united by Tormund's leadership and their respect for Jon Snow. Even a delegation from the Iron Islands appeared, led by Yara Greyjoy herself. "My brother died fighting for you," Yara told Jon when she was brought before the assembled commanders. "The Iron Islands will honor that sacrifice." "How many ships?" Daenerys asked. 24 war galleys, fully crewed. If you need to evacuate across the narrow sea, we can carry 10,000. "We're not evacuating," Jon said firmly. "We make our stand here." "Good," Yara grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that. My crews have been spoiling for a real fight." As evening approached, and the last light faded from the western sky, Jon found himself standing once again on the battlements, looking out over the vast encampment that had grown up around Winterfell. Thousands of campfires dotted the snow like fallen stars, each one representing men and women who had chosen to stand against the darkness. Daenerys joined him, her presence a welcome warmth against the bitter cold. Together they watched as dragons circled overhead, their massive forms silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, its voice carrying across the winter air. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly. "No," Jon answered honestly. "I don't think anyone could be ready for what's coming. But we'll face it anyway." "We will, because the alternative is unthinkable." They stood in comfortable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new preparations, new reports of the approaching enemy. But tonight, they had this moment of peace before the storm. In the distance, another horn sounded, long and mournful. More riders approaching, more allies answering the call to defend the realms of men. Each arrival brought hope, but also a reminder of how desperate their situation had become. The entire continent was emptying itself into this one place, making their final stand against the longest night. "Jon," Daenerys said softly, "whatever happens in the battle, I want you to know." "I know," he interrupted gently. "I know." Above them the northern lights began to dance across the sky, sheets of green and blue fire painting the darkness with ethereal beauty. In the old stories, such lights were said to be the spirits of dead heroes, watching over the living in times of great peril. If that was true, Jon thought, then they would have plenty of protection in the days to come. Chapter 5. The Dead March. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees overnight, and frost covered every surface of Winterfell like a shroud of death. Breath misted in the air as soldiers moved through their morning routines, their movements sharp and efficient, despite the bone-deep cold that seemed to seep through even the thickest furs and armor. Jon stood at the highest tower of Winterfell, a spyglass in his hand, as he scanned the northern horizon. The landscape stretched out before him, an endless expanse of white broken only by the dark lines of bare trees and frozen streams. For now it appeared empty, peaceful even, but he knew that appearance was deceiving. Footsteps on the stairs behind him announced another arrival. Jorah Mormont climbed into view, his weathered face grim with the weight of recent intelligence. The old knight had spent the night coordinating with scouts and ravens, gathering every scrap of information about their approaching enemy. "They've crossed the last river," Jorah reported without preamble. The advanced scouts report a host so vast it stretches beyond the horizon. They move without stopping, without resting, like a force of nature itself. "How long?" Jon asked, lowering the spyglass. "By midday tomorrow they'll be in sight of our walls. By evening they'll be at our gates." Jon absorbed this information with the calm that had become his trademark in moments of crisis. Inside, his heart raced with the knowledge that their time of preparation was nearly over, but his face showed only thoughtful determination. And the Night King rides at the center of the host, just as the Queen reported. "Our scouts couldn't get close enough for details, but they say the very air around him seems to freeze. Birds fall dead from the sky when they fly too near." A new voice joined their conversation as Samwell Turley appeared at the top of the stairs, his arms full of ancient texts and his face flushed from the climb. Despite his scholarly appearance, Sam had proven himself invaluable in their preparations, his knowledge of ancient lore providing insights that seasoned warriors had missed. "I've found something," Sam announced breathlessly. "In the oldest texts from the Citadel, there are references to the last time the Night King was defeated. It wasn't just dragonfire that stopped him." "What else?" Jon asked, turning his full attention to his oldest friend. "Valyrian steel, dragonglass, and something called the Song of Ice and Fire. The texts are unclear about what that means exactly, but they suggest that certain bloodlines have power over the dead." "Targaryen blood," Jorah said with understanding. "And Stark blood," Sam added, looking directly at Jon. "The combination of both seems to be significant. The histories mention that the last alliance was led by a Stark and a Targaryen working together." Jon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The parallels were too obvious to ignore, the pattern too clear to be coincidence. He thought of Daenerys, probably at this moment in the dragon pit preparing her children for battle, and wondered if their growing bond was more than personal attraction. "There's more," Sam continued. "The texts mention specific rituals, ways to channel that power, but they're written in Old Valyrian and High Valyrian mixed with the old tongue of the First Men. It would take weeks to translate properly." "We don't have weeks," Jon said. "I know, but Daenerys might be able to help with the Valyrian portions, and Bran might know the old tongue passages between the three of us." "Do it," Jon ordered. "Whatever it takes. If there's a way to end this that doesn't require sacrificing half our army, we need to find it." Sam nodded and hurried back down the stairs, his precious texts clutched against his chest. Jorah remained, his weathered hands gripping the stone battlements as he stared north. "I've fought in many battles," the old knight said quietly. "Seen men die for good causes and bad ones. But this feels different." "Different how?" "Final. As if everything we've ever done, every choice we've made, has led to this moment. Win or lose, the world will never be the same after tomorrow." Jon understood what he meant. This wasn't a battle for territory or political advantage. This was a battle for the very survival of human civilization, for the right of the living to continue existing in a world that belonged to them. A horn sounded from the courtyard below, followed by the sound of organized movement. The morning training session was beginning, with Arya leading a group of volunteers in techniques for fighting the undead. Her voice carried clearly in the cold air as she demonstrated the most effective ways to strike with dragon glass weapons. "Remember," she called out to her students, They don't feel pain, they don't get tired, and they don't fear death because they're already dead, but they can be stopped. Shatter the bones, sever the spine, destroy the head. Dragon glass cuts through them like butter if you know where to strike. Watching his sister work, Jon felt a surge of pride mixed with worry. Arya had become deadly efficient at killing, but the dead were unlike any enemy she had faced before. Still, if anyone could adapt to this new threat, it would be her. More activity in the courtyard caught his attention. Dothraki warriors were tending to their horses, their voices raised in what sounded like prayers or chants in their native tongue. Nearby, unsullied soldiers moved through their formations with mechanical precision, their discipline unshaken by the approaching threat. "The men are ready," Jorah observed, following Jon's gaze. "As ready as they can be. But are we asking too much of them? To stand against death itself? We're asking them to be heroes. Most men never get that chance." Jon considered this as he watched the organized chaos below. Every person in that courtyard, from the highest lord to the humblest servant, had chosen to be here. They could have fled south, could have sailed across the narrow sea, could have hidden in the deep places of the world. Instead, they had come to Winterfell to make their stand. The sound of beating wings announced the arrival of dragons returning from their morning patrol. Drogon landed first, his massive form settling on the stone with surprising grace. Rhaegal and Viserion followed, their golden and cream scales bright against the gray morning sky. Daenerys slid down from Drogon's back, her face serious as she strode toward the keep. Even from this distance, Jon could read her body language, the controlled urgency that meant important news. He made his way down from the tower, meeting her in the main hall where other commanders were already gathering. "They're closer than we thought," she announced without preamble. "I could see their advance scouts from the air, maybe 10 miles north. They're not just marching anymore, they're running." "Running?" Tyrion asked with alarm. "Not like men run, but faster than walking, as if something is driving them forward with greater urgency." "What could make the dead hurry?" someone asked. "Maybe they know something we don't," Bran said, from his wheeled chair. The young lord had been silent through most of their preparations, his strange abilities focused on tasks only he understood. Or maybe they sense something that threatens them. "Like what?" Jon asked. "Like the fact that their window of opportunity is closing. Winter is here, but spring always follows winter. The longer they wait, the stronger we become. Or weaker," Tyrion pointed out. "Our supplies won't last forever." "The dead don't know about supplies," Bran replied with that unnerving certainty he had developed. "They know about power, about magic, about the ancient forces that shape the world, and those forces are shifting." Before anyone could ask what he meant by that cryptic statement, more urgent news arrived. A scout burst through the main doors, his horse lathered with sweat despite the cold and his face pale with exhaustion or fear. "My lords," he gasped, falling to one knee. "The dead have taken Deepwood Motte. The entire garrison, near 1,000 men, now marches in their ranks." A collective intake of breath greeted this news. Deepwood Motte was less than 50 miles away, which meant their enemy had added significantly to their numbers, while also removing a potential source of reinforcements for Winterfell. "How?" Daenerys asked. "They surrounded the castle in the night. No siege, no assault. The dead simply climbed the walls like spiders, overwhelming the defenders through sheer numbers. By dawn, every man inside had joined their army." Jon felt the walls closing in around them. Each piece of news was worse than the last, each report painting their situation in starker terms. But surrender was not an option, retreat was impossible, and defeat meant the end of everything they had ever loved. "Double the watch," he ordered. "Light every torch, man every wall. If they can move faster than we expected, then we need to be ready sooner than planned." As the scout was led away to rest and recover, Jon found himself alone with Daenerys for a moment. She moved close to him, her presence a source of strength and comfort even in the midst of growing chaos. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Terrified," he admitted, "but not of dying, of failing, of letting down everyone who's counting on us." "Then we'd better not fail." Her simple confidence, her absolute refusal to consider defeat, reminded him why he had fallen in love with her. Dragons were fearless creatures, and she was the mother of dragons in more than just name. Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying with it the promise of snow and the faint scent of something unnatural. Winter was deepening, and with it came the certainty that tomorrow would bring the greatest test any of them had ever faced. Chapter 6. Before the dawn. The War Council convened in the Great Hall as the sun reached its zenith, though the thick clouds made it seem more like twilight. Every major commander and lord had gathered around the massive oak table, their faces reflecting the gravity of their situation. Maps covered every surface, marked with defensive positions, retreat routes, and the last known positions of enemy forces. Jon stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding respect from the diverse group assembled before him. To his right sat Daenerys, regal even in her practical battle gear, while Tyrion occupied the seat to his left, his sharp mind focused on the tactical discussions. Around the table sat the Lords of the North, the Knights of the Vale, free folk leaders, and commanders from across the Seven Kingdoms. "The outer defenses are complete," reported Ser Davos, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had overseen countless preparations. 3 lines of trenches filled with pitch and oil, dragon-glass caltrops scattered across the approaches, and fire arrows positioned at regular intervals along the walls. "What about the dragon-glass supply?" asked Lord Royce. "Every sword has been touched with dragon-glass, where possible," Gendry answered from his position near the smiths and craftsmen. "We've managed to forge nearly 1,000 dragon-glass spearheads, and twice that many arrowheads. Not enough for everyone, but enough to equip our front lines. The dragons will provide the primary offensive capability," Daenerys added. "Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion are ready for sustained combat. We've practiced coordinated attacks and defensive maneuvers. They know their role." Lyanna Mormont stood to address the group, her small frame belying the authority in her voice. "Bear Island has brought every warrior we could spare. We may be few in number, but we've been fighting for survival our entire lives. The dead won't find us easy prey." "Nor will they find any of us easy," Tormund declared, from where he leaned against the wall with several other free folk leaders. "We've been running from these things for years, but now we have nowhere left to run. Time to stand and fight." "The question," Tyrion said thoughtfully, "is whether we can inflict enough damage to break their advance before they overwhelm our positions. Every casualty they take is temporary, unless we burn the bodies. Every casualty we take becomes permanent reinforcement for their side. Which is why we need to win quickly," Jon said. "Strike hard, strike fast, and don't give them time to adapt or regroup." Bran spoke for the first time during the meeting, his strange voice cutting through the tactical discussions like a blade. "The Night King will come for me. That's what he wants, what he's always wanted. The three-eyed raven represents memory, history, the continuity of human knowledge. He seeks to erase all of that." "Then we keep you safe," Sansa said firmly, "protected in the crypts with the other non-combatants." "No," Bran replied calmly. "I need to be bait. The Night King won't commit himself to the battle while he thinks I might escape. Only when he believes he can reach me will he expose himself." "Absolutely not," Jon said immediately. "We're not using you as bait." "It's not your choice," Bran said, with that unnerving certainty he had developed. "This is what I was meant to do. The three-eyed raven has seen this moment across thousands of possible futures. This is the only way." The room fell silent as the implications of Bran's words settled over the assembled commanders. Using the young Lord of Winterfell as bait went against every instinct they had, but his strange abilities had proven reliable in the past. Where? Daenerys asked quietly. The Gods would. The Heart Tree has power, old magic that might provide some protection, and it's far enough from the main battle that you can position forces to intercept when he comes for me. Who? Jon asked. The Arn, Bran said, without hesitation. He's proven his loyalty, and he knows the price of redemption. He'll stand with me when the moment comes. Theon Greyjoy, who had been silent throughout the meeting, straightened at hearing his name. I won't let them take you, he said quietly, whatever it costs. It will cost everything, Bran replied, matter-of-factly. But that's the price of victory. Before anyone could object further, a commotion outside interrupted their planning. Through the tall windows, they could see riders approaching at full gallop, their horses lathered with sweat and their banners bearing news from the scouts. The lead rider dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and rushed into the hall, still breathing hard from his desperate ride. My lords, he gasped. They're here. The dead have reached our outer perimeter. How many? Jon asked. All of them. The entire host, stretching from horizon to horizon, and at their head, the scout's voice faltered for a moment. The Night King rides a dragon. The room erupted in shocked exclamations and urgent questions. The possibility that the Night King might have his own dragon had been discussed but never confirmed. Now that terrible suspicion had become reality. Viserion, Daenerys whispered, her face going pale. They have Viserion. The revelation hit like a physical blow. One of Daenerys's children, transformed into an instrument of death and destruction, would now be used against them. The tactical implications were staggering, but the emotional impact on the Dragon Queen was even worse. How? Tyrion asked. North of the wall, Jon said grimly, remembering their desperate mission to capture a White. When we went beyond the wall to get proof of the dead, we lost Viserion to the Night King. I hoped he might not be able to control a dragon. Dragons are magic, Sam said quietly from his corner, surrounded by ancient texts. If the Night King can raise the dead, he can probably command any creature touched by magic. Which means we're facing 4 dragons instead of 3, Lord Roy said, with obvious dismay. 3, Daenerys corrected firmly. Viserion was my child, but that thing the Night King rides is just a corpse animated by dark magic. It doesn't have the intelligence or loyalty of a living dragon. But it has the fire, Jorah pointed out gently. Ice, Bran corrected. The texts speak of ice dragons, creatures that breathe cold instead of flame. If Viserion has been transformed completely, then we adapt, Jon said firmly. We've faced impossible odds before, and survived. We'll do it again. The scout who had brought the news cleared his throat hesitantly. There's more, my lord. The Night King sent a message. What kind of message? Daenerys asked. He had the dead arrange themselves into words visible from the air. One word, repeated across the entire front of his army. What word? Surrender. A grim silence settled over the room as everyone absorbed this information. The Night King was offering them a choice, one last chance to avoid the coming slaughter. But everyone present knew that surrender to the dead would be worse than death itself. Well then, Tyrion said after a moment, his voice carrying forced lightness. I suppose we'd better send a reply. What kind of reply? Asked Lyanna Mormont. The kind that involves dragonfire and Valyrian steel, Jon answered. We fight with everything we have, and we don't stop fighting until either they're destroyed or we are. Agreed, Daenerys said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered cities and freed slaves. The dead want to erase humanity from the world. We won't let that happen. As the council began to disperse to make final preparations, Jon caught Daenerys's arm gently. Are you ready for this? No, she admitted quietly. I'm not ready to fight my own child, even if he's been corrupted. But I'll do it because I have to. We'll do it together, Jon corrected. Fire and ice, dragon and wolf. The way it was always meant to be. Outside, the first snow of the coming storm began to fall, large flakes that covered the ground like a burial shroud. Somewhere beyond the walls, an army of the dead waited in perfect silence, their only movement the slow advance that would bring them to Winterfell's gates by nightfall. The last day of preparation was ending, and with it came the certainty that tomorrow would determine the fate of every living soul in Westeros. Victory would mean survival, and the chance to rebuild. Defeat would mean the end of everything they had ever known or loved. But tonight, they still had hope, still had each other, and still had dragons to light the darkness. As the final preparations continued through the night, a horn sounded from the northern watchtower, its deep note cutting through the winter air like a blade. Every head turned toward the sound, every conversation stopped, every heart skipped a beat. Jon rushed to the battlements, Daenerys close behind him. In the distance, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, a line of pale blue light stretched across the horizon. It moved slowly but relentlessly toward Winterfell, like the edge of winter itself advancing across the land. The army of the dead had arrived. Thousands upon thousands of whites marched in perfect silence, their glowing blue eyes creating an eerie constellation against the black night. At their head rode the Night King on his undead dragon, ice crystals forming in the air around them, with each beat of corrupted wings. "Light the signals," Jon commanded, his voice carrying across the walls. "Let every defender know the battle is about to begin." Beacon fires blazed to life along the battlements, their orange flames a defiant answer to the cold blue glow approaching from the north. Dragons roared overhead as Daenerys called Drogon and Rhaegal to her side, their living fire ready to clash with the magic of death itself. The Night King's mount landed on a ridge overlooking Winterfell, close enough that his ancient face was visible in the torchlight. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the two armies faced each other across the snow-covered battlefield, the living and the dead, fire and ice, the final confrontation that would determine the fate of the world. Then the Night King raised his sword, and with a sound like breaking ice, the army of the dead began their assault. The battle for Dawn had begun. That's the end of Episode 1 of our AI rewritten Game of Thrones Season 8. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this opening episode and whether you'd like me to continue with Episode 2, where the actual battle begins, and we'll see if our heroes can survive the longest night.